Disclaimer and warning statement. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Exposing Deathcare podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the host or the podcast. Content warning. This podcast contains discussions of sensitive topics related to the funeral industry, including unethical practices, trauma, and misconduct. Listener discretion is advised. The stories shared in this podcast are presented anonymously to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. Thank you for listening, and we hope that by sharing these stories, we can work together to improve the funeral industry for everyone involved. Welcome to Exposing Deathcare, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on the funeral industry, revealing the truth behind its darkest practices. I'm your host, Em, and each episode we bring you real stories from funeral directors and death care workers who have experienced the best and worst of this hidden world. Once again, before we dive in, a quick disclaimer. The stories shared on this podcast are anonymous and may contain sensitive content. Listener discretion advised.
Hi, how you doing?
I am good. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. I had another person ask me that recently, and I said, fair to moderate, much like the weather.
That sounds about right for me as well.
All right, very good. Well, how did you get into death care?
So I actually started in the industry working in cemetery. I lived in a semi-rural area, and I came across a posting one day that was for pre-need sales at a cemetery. And I had already wanted to be a funeral director since as far back as I can remember. I remember being a little kid and wanting to be a funeral director. I jumped and took that opportunity back in 2016 and just kind of worked my way up from that into transfer technician, crematory operator, funeral director, embalmer. And I've also worked on the other side of death care in medico legal death investigations as well.
Ooh, interesting. There seems to be a lot of crossover between forensics and funeral care. Do you agree?
Yeah,
Yeah, they would go hand in hand. It would work out well.
very important that they start to go more hand in hand for that reason, because I feel like a lot of funeral directors aren't necessarily out of tune with what happens on the medico legal death investigation side. But there's a lot of frustration sometimes with maybe how an autopsy is done or the length of time that it takes, or maybe what a family was told on that end. And I think it just comes from a misunderstanding of what all actually goes into that job.
I 100% agree. It should be something that they at least introduce in the continuing education courses.
Definitely.
I can think of multiple instances where I've seen on Facebook forums professionals in our industry complaining about this, that, and the other was done, and it just becomes a big old bitch fest.
It does. Yeah.
Toxic.
Yep.
Well, let's get into the nitty gritty. You're here to share some experiences that many of us have had that we just haven't talked about. So take it away, Elle.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the main reasons why your post caught my attention when it came to this podcast, simply for the fact that we're seeing the older generation of funeral professionals. They're starting to retire. Some of them are starting to die. And then we've got the younger people coming in, and that mixture in between. I feel like there's so many people and managers especially that live by the motto of I had to do it this way, I had to suffer this way, so I'm going to make you suffer that way as well. And that's the most toxic thing that we could possibly do to our new up and coming funeral professionals, because ultimately those new funeral professionals are what is going to keep this industry alive. And it's so difficult to see that. And I would say that the number one thing that's an issue for me when it comes to death care is the general toxicity. It's not the families, it's not the work itself. You see so many people, especially old timers, complaining that nobody wants to work, nobody wants to be on call. That is not the case. When we join this industry and we decide to go to school, I can't speak for everyone and say that everyone is well informed of what all goes into this industry, but a majority of us are. And if we aren't, we learn very quickly. And most of the time, those people don't even make it out of school, or they don't even make it through their internship before they're gone. And it's just, I just cannot fathom why we are still living by that let's let's just talk down to people, let's degrade them, let's try and make them as miserable as possible just because they had it rough. We should want to build up these people, and we should want to break the cycle. And it's just like any other cycle of abuse almost. It's very disheartening. And when it comes to experiences for me, it's hard for me to even pinpoint certain experiences at this point because it all blurs together. And I'm sure you have the same type of experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They talk about it's kind of this whole what is it, hazing kind of a situation. Like I had to do it,
Yeah.
so do you. We're not doing anybody any favors, and what I've seen is people in my inbox on social media over the years. Like I've been doing this social media thing since 2016 as well. It's like they're coming to me with these terrible stories, and I was just like, we have to have an outlet for this. We have to let other people know that they're not alone in some of these experiences, and there are those of us out here that want to make it better, that definitely want to see change, because you're right, they're absolutely destroying the industry in the way that they knew it. And COVID, you blinked, and now look how many different styles of funeral homes there are now that don't
Hmm.
even look like funeral homes, and they did this
Yeah.
to themselves.
Yeah. I would say that was something that I was very surprised about because obviously having wanted to be a funeral director since I was a kid, I had it in my mind that funeral service was traditional. Nowadays, you're seeing less and less traditional funeral homes. They're being replaced by low-cost cremation centers. That's not
Yes.
great. I mean, if we're going to have multiple disposition options, fantastic. We need to start building up the funeral home possibilities regarding those disposition options. Instead, we're losing families to low-cost cremation, and ultimately, they are the ones who are being done a disservice because they are not getting the opportunity to grieve as a whole, as a family, with friends and memories of their loved ones, which is the whole point of what a traditional funeral service is for. I
Yeah, it is part of
understand
that
cost
healing
can be
process.
a barrier, yes. And you're going to always have funeral homes that are a little bit more greedy, and if it is a rural area and there's only one or two funeral homes, of course they're going to own the market. And I just wish that we could all understand that we are all here to do the same thing. We are here to serve families. We are here, yes, to make a living. That is part of it. But there are so many compromises. There are so many ways that we can accomplish a family being able to have the service that they wish to have without it breaking the bank and with us still being able to earn a paycheck.
I 100% agree with that. What I've experienced is that early in my career, I was in a rural area as well, and you would see the funeral homes help each other. Like if there was
Hmm.
something going on where they needed an extra hearse, they had two services that day, the guy in the town over would bend over backwards to do anything he could to help him out.
Yep.
You don't see
Yep.
that kind of camaraderie out there anymore, and if it exists, it's not talked about nearly as much as it needs to be.
No, you don't
It's
see it.
all it's all about stab the other guy, ruin them, tear them apart. You get a family that's shopping
Hmm.
around, and how many times have you overheard the coworker bad mouthing the funeral home that they just came from in order to make themselves look better?
That is exactly right. And it's obvious to the public. I mean, the public is not stupid. They can see it. It's talked about frequently. I've seen several comments in regards to this podcast of that we don't need to give more bad information out there about this industry. We don't need to make ourselves look worse. Well, we're doing that just fine on our own the way that we are going.
Mhm.
This podcast is not going to suddenly make the funeral industry burst and explode and look like a bad guy. There is enough of that being done just by the daily functionings of how a funeral home is being ran and how funeral directors treat other funeral directors in this industry.
Some of the worst management experience I ever got was, people know where I've worked. So when I left Texas, uh, being managed by individuals that had been grandfathered in to a license that genuinely had no genuine heart in being in this business. It was something that they had fallen into and were sold with the operations. You got to keep this guy on staff for X number of years because he's been around since he was a whippersnapper. And you
Mm-hmm.
get people in those power positions that they see younger, I'm not younger anymore, but younger go-getters, people that are willing to bend over backwards, for the families and their employer. And I think there's a jealousy to it that they just want to see them suffer. They're like, well, I suffered, so do you've got to suffer as well. And having that kind of management that didn't care about the output, that didn't care about the final product, that cared about their reputation in the community
Yeah.
and the families that they would meet with, and then they just throw you bones. It was a whole different experience. Like, I had experienced the backstabbing between other firms, but to have people within your own firm family doing
Yes.
that.
Yeah. I would say that leads me to my next topic in terms of just the general toxicity that we're seeing. I have never in my life been backstabbed more or treated more poorly than by coworkers at firms. And I will say that I was very surprised because I thought that it would be the older people that were, just hating on the younger individuals coming into the industry. I will say that in my experience, a majority of the older people within funeral service have been fantastic. They are eager to not only teach, but to learn. Especially the last firm that I worked at, there were several old school embalmers there that were just very excited about being able to learn new things that we have grown to understand and learn over the years. And that was very refreshing. The majority of the poor treatment and toxicity has been from people my age, and that's awful. I I don't even have the words for some of the things that I have experienced from coworkers. Just
Well,
the type of people that can sit there and act so nice to your face, but then do everything that they can to try and cause you destruction. I mean, lying, cheating, stealing, those are just some of the basics that we all know shouldn't be done. But then they're doing it no problem and sleeping just fine at night. They will do everything that they can to push off their errors on somebody else. And what are you going to do? You're going to sit there and fight it? I've been in several situations where I can admit that I have grown over the years from being a 20 something to, mid 30s, and I can say that back in the day I was definitely someone who maybe didn't take full accountability like I should when it comes to certain things after being in the industry for as long as I have. I can say without a doubt that I have grown so much because if I have an altercation with a coworker, I will go and apologize to keep the peace in situations where I am not in the wrong. There has been so many times where I have brought up legitimate concerns about how something is being done or something that I've witnessed or something that I have seen, and I could just contact the state board. I mostly try to take an educational approach where if I see you doing something that isn't right, maybe you're just not well informed, or maybe you're newer to the industry, or maybe you just don't know. So I will try and educate without belittling. I would say that within my time in the industry, it has not been all bad. I have made great connections. I have learned so much. I genuinely have appreciated all of the time that I have been in this industry. And it has not been, except for the last year maybe, where I really encountered my first set of like toxic people. And it's just so disheartening because they are all my age and it's
Yeah.
scary.
My
So,
biggest hater is somebody that I mentored on social media and then mentored in person. I've come to find out in the last year of intense therapy that I am a little bit on the spectrum, and I overshare. That's been a huge fault of mine, and I trusted this individual so much, and they have made it their mission to destroy me, like spreading horrible rumors online that I can't even begin to like. How do you even how do you even explain that away? It's just like it's so shocking you can't even open your mouth to defend yourself. Um,
yeah, the hard part about that too is the fact of like some of the things that occur in situations like this, they're so outlandish that when you try to tell somebody or explain it to somebody or just put it into words, you look crazy. Like it looks like a huge conspiracy. You look
yeah.
like you are just not right because it sounds so crazy. And I feel like I'm consistently having to, when explaining to somebody what I have dealt with certain people within this industry, I have to from the get-go be like, listen, this is going to sound crazy. This is going to sound off the wall. You are going to think that I am just out of my mind. I have the proof to back myself up. It's just, it's crazy that it gets to that point, and I don't understand. I'm sure that doctors, lawyers, all of them, they've got their own toxicity. There's always going to be toxicity in different industries. It's not that it's the industry that is toxic. It's these people. It's these
Oh
people
yeah.
that will do anything they can to make it look like you're the bad guy. And I fully have finally realized that it's because of their own shortcomings. They are failing in a certain area or they're feeling unconfident in a certain area and they just go full defense mode and just latch on as you're their target when instead they should really be considering the fact that you're just trying to not even just be a decent person and a decent coworker. You're trying to give them clear direction and steer them in the right direction because we are here to serve families. I don't care what you're doing on the weekends. I don't care about any of that. I don't care if you've got a gambling problem and you're $1 million in debt. The point of it is that I don't care about what transgressions you've had go on in your life as long as you can show up to work and perform the job that you're here to perform and be the decent person that you are trying to show these families that you are because death is life changing and
Mhm.
you get to go sit at your desk and talk shit to your friends, but that mom is going home without her baby that never took a breath, and that dad, he pulled up to the scene of his 21-year-old son's car accident, and it's just these people's lives are changed. These are mothers and fathers without their children. These are children without their parents. And it's devastating. And it's not to be taken lightly. And I know that you should never let work get so heavy that it affects you outside of work. But why are we sitting here fighting each other? That
Oh
makes
yeah.
no sense.
The majority of the funeral people that I've had bad experiences with just need to learn grace. They're stuck
Yes.
in this junior high or high school mentality. There's a lot of jealousy there. I didn't ask to have a social media presence. It started out as something that I was doing for myself and my friends, and I just didn't have my shit private.
Yeah.
Like I continued to share because nobody else was sharing that kind of stuff, and the amount of hate that produced, it and know that it stifles other people from being creative and sharing their spark.
Yeah. It does. I think you're right. I think that when it comes to especially like a social media presence, I do think that a lot of it is jealousy. Um, but I mean, there's also a lot of fear too. I mean, there's a lot of us that would love to be able to educate people but we know firsthand and have seen firsthand how our bosses talk about the funeral industry professionals that have social media presence, and we know that we would be without a job. I mean, I know that I would absolutely love to be able to educate people about what I do, but I just know that I can't, and it sucks. I wish that it could be better. And that's just another instance of people not being better. They're just stuck.
The amount of people that were, we'll call them funeral tainers since they love that word, funeral tainers now, I take great pride in that because I know that I was one of the OGs that started showing this stuff behind the scenes. And now there are people that are going out there that have more cojones than I do that are doing a great job. Like I think of Hollis Funeral Home, or I think of Melissa, the funeral director that's, in Jersey or whatever. That kind of content is what was missing. And I think that the haters drinking their haterade are just upset that they didn't jump to do it first because they think they know everything better than everyone else. They know better.
Yeah, there are always going to be bad apples. The funeral industry takes the cake when it comes to it. And that was just something that I was very surprised about, having worked in several different positions.
Oh, yeah. You think that these people are going to be teammates and compassionate, and in reality, not everybody is blessed with those kind of working conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, tell me something else that you've experienced that you want to share with others.
I would say that within my time within the funeral industry, we're starting to see less and less people that make it through mortuary school and make it through their internships and actually go on to stay within this industry. And I have seen so many people go through all that and they last a couple of years and then they leave. And then you see the groups on like Facebook where it's like support after Deathcare and those kinds of groups. It's just so disheartening. I had a boss, and this boss, when I first started there, she was very nice. I didn't really form a connection with her. I really am one of those people who prefers to go to work, do my work, and then go home and not worry about work. Like, I can be a good coworker without divulging into my personal life with you. That's how I feel about it. She started off very, distant. We didn't talk outside of work very much. And then all of a sudden, she started to talk with me outside of work. We texted every day. Um, if I had something big going on in life, I would talk with her about it and vice versa. If I did something, even like go and get a new plant, I'd send her a picture. Like, she actually was a big part of several parts of my life for well over a year, to the point where I spent time with her outside of work. You know what I mean? Like, we were friends. I would have considered us to have been friends. And the way that she would talk about coworkers, she probably did the same with other people about me, but I just didn't see it at the time. Like, I wanted to genuinely believe that she was my friend. It really kind of that was probably the thing that kind of sealed the deal for me with that funeral home. And I really started to make an exit plan because I started to see such toxicity. It got to the point of borderline, this could be a lawsuit one day type stuff. And it concerned me. And I realized that I needed to get out. Like, firing somebody because of maybe their sexual orientation or because of their gender. And obviously a manager, especially a managers our age, they're smart. They can figure out ways to do that kind of stuff without it being obvious that that's why. But when you're close with somebody and they talk to you about everything, you kind of get the real details.
Oh, yeah.
So
I've been fired for stupid reasons before, and it's usually just because my personality didn't mesh with the person that was making the decision. Um,
Yes.
it was never that I ever disappointed a family or, was late to work or called in too many times. Like, perfect attendance, always volunteering for overtime. It was definitely just personalities were not
Yeah. Yeah.
cohesive.
And that's exactly it. When I started at this particular funeral home, she was pretty new to the funeral home. Um, she had only been there for a couple of months, and there was already a really good group of people that were working there when she got there. And one by one, she she found ways to let them go. And I look at it as she was wanting to mold her own little army of people that she could trust with her secrets and, that she felt were going to have her back. And she wanted to get rid of the people that she felt were outsiders.
That weren't
And
manipulatable.
yes, that's exactly it. And one by one, I watched them all go. And the sad thing is that, let's see, out of one, two, three, four, five, six people that I could think of off of the top of my head within a year's time, none of them are in the funeral industry anymore. She broke
Mm.
6 people. Those are the ones that I like can sit there and be like, okay, I know that this person actually was let go for this reason. Or I know that, this job description was changed so that this person would leave, that kind of stuff. That's the kind of thing that I am talking about. And it's the thing that kind of scares me with the old timers leaving the industry and this generation stepping into management roles, because if we're not careful and we're not really paying attention to what's going on behind the scenes, that's going to be an issue. Another thing that was particular to this funeral home, because this was family owned, if you did bring up a concern to the higher ups, it was brushed under the rug. Oh yeah, we take your concerns very seriously, blah blah blah. Nothing was ever done. In fact, it would continue to get worse. And, finally, after bringing up concerns multiple times about the way that things were going on or what wasn't going on or just treatment of people, finally something catastrophic happened. And they can't say I didn't warn them that there was an issue, because I sure did.
In your experience between working family owned and corporate, which seemed to be the most chaotic?
Family owned 100%. I would never go back to a family owned funeral home ever. I have worked
Mhm.
both corporate and family owned, and I remember when I first started mortuary school and first started working in the industry, all I heard was, you know, family owned is the best, like corporate is awful, corporate is just greedy and they treat everyone like crap and they're not really there for their families. And I mean, there's always going to be bad apples on any side, but my experience with corporate was that not only did a stable schedule allow for the funeral directors to actually get
Yes,
rest and be more willing to go above and beyond for families. Um,
able to.
yeah, like the pay was better, the schedule was better, the benefits were better, and I would say that the people that I encountered were better, honestly.
That's refreshing.
Family owned funeral homes, I guess they have their place, but I will say that as we see more and more get sold to corporate, I I don't see family owned being a regular fixture forever. I mean, there's always going to be some, I would imagine, but they're not going to be around like they were 30 years ago.
The
Um,
majority of them will be the direct cremation places that have the pop-up,
yeah, exactly.
storefront
Yeah.
funeral homes. They're all using the same mortuary service and
Yep.
getting in
Yep.
queue. Yeah, you'll see more of
Yeah.
that.
But I would
It's
say, because I worked at corporate up until this particular funeral home that I worked at last, which was the family owned funeral home. And my career was great. I enjoyed the people that I worked with. I really never had a bad coworker. I never had anybody that I felt made it so I didn't want to continue to work there. Of course, there's difficult people everywhere, but I went to work and I went home and I had a stable schedule and I was rested and I got to do the things that I wanted to do outside of work. when I was working at the family-owned funeral home, there were just so many changes that were done solely to control the people that worked there and just to assert dominance. It just left such a bad taste in my mouth when it comes to family-owned that I personally will not go back to one.
I'll have to agree with you on that. I initially in my career was like, corporate sucks. I was one of the ones that used to call SCI. I almost dropped my beverage. I used to call SCI the evil empire. I will tell you
Mhm.
this: they have gotten their shit together so much more than when I first got into the funeral
Yeah.
industry. I haven't worked for them again since earlier in my career. Um, but it was family owned was the way to go back then. The experiences that I was having in family owned funeral homes were miles and miles ahead of what I had
Yeah.
experienced at corporate entities. But then here later in my career, or maybe it's just the area that I'm in, or just the times have changed. The family owned ones don't give you good insurance. They don't give you a good work
Mm-mm.
life balance. They want you to be joining the Rotary Club and all this other stuff, but you're not paid for all this extracurricular activities they
Yeah.
expect you to do. Like, if I could tell you how many hours I devoted to my employers, unpaid, like, especially with the dog involved too, yeah. Man,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be having to worry about where my next meal was coming from.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I mean, they definitely were all about, we want you to do this volunteer work and we want you to do this volunteer work and we want you to do all of this outside of business hours and we're not going to pay you for it.
Mhm.
And there was even a time where I had to pay for my own license. Like, why am I paying for my own license? That's the benefit of being with a firm long term. I can understand like if you maybe like they reimburse you for your license or they have you agree that like if you quit within 90 days you repay it back or something like that. But I mean, if you're working solely with one firm,
Mhm.
they need to pay to upkeep your license because you're not sitting there being a funeral director on your own. You're
This
being a funeral
shit's not
director
cheap.
for their firm. Exactly. And they do not pay enough to cover the cost.
No,
So,
and in a lot of these states, the funeral director license and the embalmer's license are charged separately.
yeah.
So even if you are just acting as a funeral director to maintain that license without having to go back later and do all the hoops and jumps to reinstate it, and
Yeah.
the fees, like, we don't get
Mhm.
paid enough to be able to just chunk that out there like that. So
Yeah.
when the employers don't support the staff in maintaining their payments and their licensing, or even, they make a big deal about nobody's joining the associations. Well, if you weren't such a big old boys club.
Yeah. And then God forbid you want to use vacation time or sick
Oh yeah.
time. One of the things I will say that was a difficult situation at the last funeral home that I worked at prior to the one that I'm at now is the fact that the manager did not have children. So she just despised anybody that worked for her that had children.
I've met
And
those kind.
yeah, it was just like, okay, your life decision is your life decision, but you cannot sit there and try and treat me like I'm any less of a funeral director than you just because I have children. I worked with these people for, over a year, and they never knew that I had more than one child because of how poorly I was treated just from them knowing about me having one kid. I have more than
Mhm.
one kid.
Yeah, I will say some of the best advice that I can give people is don't let them into your personal world. Don't even let them know
Yep.
you're married if you can if you can help it.
Yeah, you are
Some people will
100%
thrive
right.
on drama, and if they can't find
Yes.
drama in their own life to mess with, they'll focus on their coworkers.
Yeah. You
Mhm.
can do everything right and you can be super diligent. And that was one of the things I loved about working corporate because I've worked at SCI and I've also worked at like Foundation Partners and Park Lawn Corporation. And, by the way, Park Lawn Corporation is amazing. I know that they're not everywhere in the US, but they are wonderful to work for and they really are supportive of their employees. But
Good to
in
hear.
comparison to in comparison to family-owned funeral homes, the stability and the chain of custody. I went from
Structure.
chain of custody being a thing where anybody who touched this body is signing off on it so that there were
Mm-hmm.
no screw ups, there were no room for error. The family was protected, the decedent was protected, everybody knew what was going on with this decedent at all times. Then I go to this family owned funeral home and they don't know what they're doing. They act like I was crazy for bringing up that they should really have a chain of custody for how many people, especially unlicensed people, were handling these bodies.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah.
that's crazy to me that you guys are just, I mean, gosh, where did this decedent go? And then we're sitting there like digging through all the bags to check ankle IDs because they don't write the names on the outside of the shrouds and there's no chain of custody. To me, that's just crazy. Like, why are we not taking preventative measures? But then they always want to point the finger when something goes wrong. And that's why I was super protective of my files. I documented everything
Oh yeah.
because
Cover your
I
ass.
knew that it was only a matter of time. Anticipate the unexpected, but you shouldn't have to do it to the extreme that I had to do it at that family owned funeral home. I can single handedly say that out of my whole working career, whether funeral industry or not, death care industry or not, that was the worst place that I've ever worked. And I will never refer a family there. I will tell you
Yep.
that you should absolutely drive an hour away and go to
Yep.
a funeral home that has decent people that you know are going to treat your loved one with care and respect.
I have
Because
bent
it's,
over backwards to make sure that friends
yes,
of mine are not taken care of by certain
yep,
individuals or
yeah,
firms that I have left because I know what goes on behind the scenes. I know the lack of transparency. I know the lack of what you said, chain of command, custody.
hmm, lack of
There's
awareness.
Yeah, there's family owned funeral homes that I have worked for without releasing who it is. I'll say within the last 4 years, you get there and there aren't even forms for people to sign, for final viewings,
Hmm.
autopsy remains. They're bringing people in that have come from the coroners and no paperwork signed off on anything. It's just like,
Yeah,
and I know those papers exist. You have organizations like the National Funeral Directors Association that has a whole file, but a lot of these people aren't even, taking advantage of some of the things that are out there to help them better their business and help them better serve the
yeah.
communities that
Because
they're in.
they don't care. It literally is just a dollar sign to them. But you're exactly right. The NFDA literally has on their website general forms that any funeral home can utilize in the course of their business. Like, why would you not take advantage of that? After I ended up leaving, they had a whole big catastrophe with cremated remains. And I was like, wow. When I heard about it, I was like, I told you guys that this would eventually happen. And that really
Ooh.
sucks for those families.
Yep. Hmm. Well, anything else you've got?
I will say that my advice to people who are coming in to the industry is don't settle. You don't have to settle. And I know that you're going to want to take the first opportunity that comes your way because you're eager and you want to get started and you want to start logging your hours and you want to learn hands on and you really want to feel like you're getting your career started. But don't settle. Do research, talk to people. There's always going to be people who have worked at that funeral home that you can talk to that will be honest and tell you, what their experience was. So you just really have to, whether you're new into the industry or you're seasoned in the industry and just wanting to make a change, just take a little time and really sit there and think about what could this place offer me that the place I'm at currently isn't? Is this a situation that I need to get out of immediately? or can it wait to do some research? Don't feel like a failure because you decide to take time off away from the industry. If you need to take time away from the industry to find your bearings and find a funeral home that is going to be good for you, that is okay. And another thing is, it's okay to move. It's okay to restart your life somewhere else. And I know that not everybody can do that. And, some people have families and ties to the communities and stuff like that. But change isn't always a bad thing. It's not a race. You're not racing to complete your internship. You're not racing to finish mortuary school. Take time, think it through, really outweigh the risks versus the benefits, and don't settle, especially at the detriment to yourself and your reputation and your license. Do not ever risk your license for somebody else, ever.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with me today, Elle.
Always just think about it and, risk versus reward.
There you go. And don't be afraid to speak up to,
Yes, do not be
state
afraid to
licensing
speak
board.
up.
Yep.
Exactly. If you're not getting anywhere with a manager, then definitely go above that. Like, the worst that happens is they wasted a little bit of time checking into something, but you could have potentially stopped a family in the future from having to go through an awful experience because of misconduct. Always pay attention. Always, you are responsible for you. You are responsible for the families that you serve, and that should be what's most important.
Absolutely. I agree. Well, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to an episode of Exposing Deathcare, the podcast. I truly appreciate your support and the courage of those who have shared their stories with us. If you or someone you know has a story to share, we encourage you to reach out. Your anonymousness will be protected, and your story could help prevent further harm. You can leave comments, ask questions, or provide feedback on our social medias, Exposing Deathcare, or email exposingdeathcare@gmail.com. Podcast music by Enlia.